It began like a spy novel, secret files, shadowy men in suits, whispered rumors of mind control and government plots. But this wasn't fiction. It was real, and it was called Project MKUltra. In the early 1950s, at the height of the Cold War, the CIA launched a top-secret program to explore one terrifying question. Can we control the human mind? They weren't just theorizing. They were testing. Using real people, often without consent, they experimented with LSD, electroshock therapy, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and far more invasive tactics, all under the umbrella of national security. And the US government paid for it, sometimes through front organizations, sometimes through respected universities and hospitals. Many of the subjects had no idea what was being done to them. Some were prisoners, some were psychiatric patients, some were regular civilian students, soldiers, even housewives who thought they were part of ordinary research. By the time MKUltra was exposed in the 1970s, dozens of lives have been destroyed, some never recovered, some didn't survive, and to this day, many of the documents remain missing, destroyed before investigators could get to them. But how did it all begin? They say history repeats itself, but what about the parts we forgot? Welcome to Echoes of History, the channel where we dig up the dusty corners of the past to uncover the weird, the wild, and the wait, what? Stories they didn't teach you in school. Grab your curiosity and maybe a cup of tea, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. To understand how MKUltra came to exist, you have to understand the world America was living in after World War II. The year is 1950. The Second World War had ended just 5 years earlier, but peace was already cracking. The Cold War had begun a new kind of war, one without bullets but full of dread. America's former ally, the Soviet Union, was now its greatest enemy. Both nations had nuclear weapons, global ambitions, and a growing distrust that could erupt into annihilation at any moment. But beyond the bombs and tanks, there was a new front in the war: the human mind. Reports began to surface that Soviets and Chinese communists were experimenting with psychological warfare, brainwashing, indoctrination, hypnosis, drugs. American soldiers who had been captured in Korea were returning home, seemingly changed, confessing to crimes, praising communism, speaking in strange tones. Some in the US government feared they had been mentally reprogrammed. The CIA panicked. If the enemy could rewire a man's loyalty, could America fall from within? Thus, the agency posed a question that would define a decade of secret research. If they can control minds, why can't we? This wasn't some fringe theory. This was backed by the highest levels of government. Congress knew parts of it. The president may have known more, but the public, completely in the dark. And so the CIA turned to science, or rather twisted, version of it. They began recruiting doctors, chemists, psychologists, hypnotists, pharmacologists, anyone who might help unlock the secrets of human consciousness. And they had virtually unlimited funding, thanks to classified black budgets buried deep in defense appropriations. One of the central figures was Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist and poison expert who would later be called the Black Sorcerer of the CIA. Gottlieb believed that LSD held the key to unlocking, and perhaps even erasing, a person's identity. LSD had only recently been discovered in 1943 by Swiss scientist Albert Hofmann. At the time, it was virtually unknown, an experimental compound with powerful effects on perception, memory, and emotion. To Gottlieb, it was perfect. He proposed a radical idea: if we can break down a person's mind, maybe we can rebuild it from scratch with new thoughts, new beliefs, even new loyalty. This wasn't just about defending America. It was about building a weapon. Not one you fire, but one you whisper. A person turned into a puppet. A spy who didn't know he was a spy. A mind that could be programmed, triggered, erased. It sounds like science fiction, but the CIA didn't just believe it. They acted on it. And in doing so, they launched MKUltra, a project so secretive, even some people working on it didn't know what they were part of. The true horror of MKUltra wasn't just its secrecy, it was the scale. At its peak, the program involved over 80 institutions, including 40 for colleges and universities, 15 research foundations, 12 hospitals, and 3 prisons. Many of these institutions had no idea they were being used. The CIA often funneled money through front organizations like the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology to disguise its involvement. Behind the curtain, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb and his team ran dozens of sub-projects under the MKUltra umbrella, each with a vague but chilling goal to discover how to control, erase, manipulate, or fragment the human mind. And the methods, they range from questionable to cruel to downright nightmarish. Let's start with LSD. It was the drug of choice for MKUltra, not to heal, but to break down the ego, induce confusion, terror, suggestibility. CIA agents dosed people with LSD without warning in bars, at work, in brothels. Sometimes, the agents drugged each other for practice, but often, the test subjects were prisoners, psychiatric patients, or simply unwitting civilians. One project, called Operation Midnight Climax, set up CIA-run brothels in San Francisco and New York. Sex workers paid by the CIA lured men into these apartments, where they were drugged with LSD and observed behind one-way glass. The goal? To study how drugs and sexual manipulation might help in interrogation and control. Another arm of MKUltra targeted mental hospitals in Canada. Dr. Ewan Cameron, funded by the CIA, performed experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. His method, known as psychic driving, involved weeks of drug-induced coma, repeated electroshock therapy, and the playing of looped messages designed to break the patient's personality. His subjects weren't spies, they were housewives, students, people suffering from depression or anxiety. Some of them never recovered. Some didn't even remember their own names afterward. In U.S. prisons, inmates were offered early release in exchange for participation in MKUltra studies. One notable participant was Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston mobster. He later claimed he was given LSD daily for over a year, with no explanation of the long-term effects. What is perhaps most disturbing is that MKUltra researchers often took detailed notes like, scientists watching lab rats while real people screamed, hallucinated, and mentally deteriorated. But not all experiments were drug-based. MKUltra also investigated sensory deprivation, sleep disruption, isolation tanks, hypnosis, and even radiation exposure. One subproject explored how to make someone forget everything, total amnesia. Another saw ways to implant false memories or create split personalities. There was no ethical oversight, no accountability, no informed consent. This was government-funded psychological torture, hiding under the banner of science. And yet, it continued for over a decade. Why? Because secrecy was easy to maintain, and the Cold War justified nearly everything. But nothing lasts forever. For over 20 years, MKUltra operated in shadows. There were no whistleblowers, no headlines, no public hearings, just quiet funding, encrypted memos, and a mountain of secrets buried in file cabinets no one was supposed to open. But then came Watergate in the early 1970s. The scandal that brought down President Nixon also shattered the illusion of government transparency. Suddenly, the press, the public, and even Congress began asking new questions. If the White House had lied about break-ins and enemies lists, what else was the government hiding? In 1974, the New York Times published a bombshell article by journalist Seymour Hersh. He alleged that the CIA had been involved in illegal domestic operations, including surveillance of U.S. citizens and experiments on unwitting subjects. The response was swift. Congress launched an investigation, and in 1975, Senator Frank Church chaired a special committee now known as the Church Committee to look into intelligence abuses. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. The CIA had not only spied on Americans, it had funded and directed dozens of secret behavioral experiments, including MKUltra. Agents were called to testify, subprojects were revealed, victims began to come forward, but there was a catch. Most of the evidence was gone. In 1973, just before the investigations began, CIA Director Richard Helms, knowing trouble was brewing, ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. Dozens of boxes of classified documents were shredded, burned, or buried. Only a misfiled cache of 20,000 documents, discovered in 1977 during a routine audit, gave investigators a partial window into what had really happened. Even then, the documents were vague coded memos, budget notes, technical language, but the stories, they were undeniable. Victims like Linda McDonald testified to losing all memory after being subjected to drug comas and electroshock in Canada. Former agents admitted to drugging civilians. Survivors spoke of lost years, ruined relationships, and mental illness they never understood until now. Still, the CIA maintained a carefully measured stance. Yes, the project existed. Yes, it went too far. But it had been shut down. And anyway, no one in power seemed to know how bad it really was. That excuse didn't sit well with the public. Lawsuits followed. Some victims received modest compensation. Others were ignored. And many, to this day, have never received an apology or even acknowledgement. The full extent of MKUltra's reach may never be known. With the destruction of documents and deaths of key figures, the truth is as fragmented as the minds the CIA tried to rewire. But one thing is certain, MKUltra was not just a rogue experiment. It was U.S. policy, approved at the highest levels, carried out by institutions of trust, and justified in the name of freedom. And the ripple effects didn't end in the 70s. MKUltra officially ended in the early 1970s, but its legacy, it never really left. Even now, decades later, it continues to echo through science, politics, pop culture, and the public psyche. It left behind more than a scandal. It left behind a blueprint for mistrust. Let's start with pop culture. From the moment it was exposed, MKUltra became a symbol of secret government overreach. It's referenced in dozens of books, films, and TV shows, sometimes subtly, sometimes by name. Think about it. In The Manchurian Candidate, a soldier is brainwashed into becoming an assassin. In Jason Bourne, A government program erases memories to create a perfect killer. And Stranger Things. The character 11 is a product of illegal mind experiments on children, a direct nod to MKUltra. Even Marvel's Winter Soldier storyline draws from these real-life fears. Mind control, code words, covert assassins. In many ways, MKUltra became the template for modern conspiracy fiction. Because the terrifying truth was, it actually happened, but the impact didn't end with movies. Let's talk about science and ethics. The exposure of MKUltra forced a reckoning in psychological and medical research. Informed consent became a legal necessity. University IRBS institutional review boards were established to prevent an ethical human experimentation. You now have to sign forms, know your rights, be told the risks because for decades. The US government proved what could happen when no one asked permission. The experiments also left lasting scars on victims and their families. Many never received compensation. Some were never even told they had been part of MKUltra until years later, when they recognized themselves in a declassified file or found their name buried in a footnote. Others didn't survive long enough to find out. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories exploded. MKUltra became the gateway drug to 1,000 rabbit holes. If the government could erase memories, drug civilians, manipulate the press, what else were they hiding? Theories about chemtrails, microwave weapons, mass shootings, even celebrity mind control. Hello. Project Monarch often cite MKUltra as their origin point, even when false. They're built on a disturbing foundation. The government really did lie. They really did conduct mind experiments. And they really did get away with it for decades. And then there's modern intelligence. While we may never see a return to LSD-fueled experiments, the ethos of control hasn't disappeared. Today's tools are cellular data mining, psychological profiling, behavioral nudging, AI surveillance. We don't need to inject LSD to influence behavior anymore. Sometimes, a well-placed algorithm does the job just fine. Some would argue that the spirit of MKUltra controlling people, without their knowledge, has simply evolved. It's no longer about erasing the mind, it's about predicting it. MKUltra is no longer an active program, but it serves as a cautionary tale of how science, fear, and power can intertwine in dangerous ways. Because when a government decides that the end justifies the means, human dignity becomes optional, and the mind your mind becomes just another battlefield. The question that lingers at the end of MKUltra's long, twisted story is this: was there ever justice? The answer, like so much of this story, is complicated. After the Church Committee hearings in the 1970s, there were no criminal trials, no CIA officials went to prison, no high-level resignations, no full public apology from the government. There were a few lawsuits, a few settlements, a few checks cut quietly to survivors or their families. But justice never came. Part of the reason is simple: the evidence was gone. Director Richard Helms ordered the majority of MKUltra S records destroyed in 1973, not because the program was ongoing, but because the heat was rising. It was a preemptive cover-up. By the time investigators came looking, all that remained were fragments. How do you prosecute a ghost? What made it worse was the government's deliberate strategy of deflection. Officials claimed that MKUltra was just an experiment, that it was limited, that no serious harm was intended, but the testimonies told another story. A mother who couldn't recognize her own child, a soldier who came home broken, not from battle but from a lab, a patient who entered therapy for anxiety and came out with no memory of who they were. Men like Frank Olson, a U.S. Army scientist who was unknowingly dosed with LSD and died after falling or being pushed from a hotel window. His family fought for decades for the truth. The CIA issued statements. Some officials expressed regret, but no one took responsibility. And the victims, many of them faded into the background of history. No memorial, no monument, no day of recognition. It's a painful reminder that sometimes, when powerful institutions commit harm, there is no satisfying ending, no court date, no redemption arc, just silence and the uneasy knowledge that it happened at all. But that doesn't mean the story ends there, because MKUltra forced a reckoning. It reshaped ethics in science and medicine. It forced the US to confront how easily fear can corrupt reason. It changed how we think about consent, surveillance, and psychological manipulation. And perhaps most importantly, it became a symbol, a dark symbol. Yes, but a vital one. MKUltra stands as a permanent reminder that in a democracy, transparency is not optional, it is essential. Because when the government believes it can do anything in secret, it eventually does the unthinkable. Even now, the echoes remain in our skepticism, in our laws, in our stories, and in the quiet hope that maybe next time, someone will ask the right questions before it's too late. MKUltra may be buried, but the idea that power must be held accountable is very much alive. And in that truth, partial and imperfect as it is, maybe there's a kind of justice after all. That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you raise an eyebrow, or don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that dusty little bell so you never miss another echo from the past. Drop it in the comments. We're always listening for new echoes. Got a weird bit of history you think we should cover? Until next time, keep your curiosity loud and your history weird. That's it.